Hi, I'm Suleiman Charles Neve and I work for Education Changemakers, and today I'm going to be presenting this presentation about in-lesson positive behaviour strategies, and we're looking today specifically at student engagement and behaviour management. Education Changemakers, we always pay our respects to the traditional owners of Australia, the Indigenous peoples, their contribution that they've made to Australia over 60,000 years, and we pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So this is today's aims. We're going to look at today these four aspects and understand how to use these behaviour strategies in the classroom. And you might recognise them. They're from Bill Rogers, Behaviour Management. Famous guy working in behaviour management. He's done a fantastic job. I actually saw him speak right back in 2002 at Woolwich Polytechnic School in southeast London. And he's an Aussie, but he was incredible, actually, really inspiring, really interesting. He used to do all these fantastic artworks on the board as you're watching his presentation to describe individual incidents within the classroom. I think what underpins all of Bill Rogers' work, and also a lot of the research since Bill Rogers did the bulk of his work right back in the 70s, 80s and 90s, is this idea about positive relationships. Lots and lots of research has come out, the connection between positive relationships and behaviour management, but also learning. You know, when a student has a positive relationship with their teacher, their learning is more effective. And this has been played out in a lot of research just over the last 10 years or so. So everything that I'm saying today from Bill Rogers' book is very much based around this idea of positive relationships. You can't just take one of these strategies out of the air and implement it in your classroom and suddenly all the kids are going to be perfectly behaved. It's got to be built on this foundation of positive relationships. But there are some practical strategies that you can use, that you can implement, that actually help you build those positive relationships. And that's what we're really looking at today. So this is a little video from Bill Rogers. This looks like it's circa early 2000s. That's what he looked like when I saw him. And he's just talking through a couple of his experiences.
So tell us about your pictures, because I think you use these, don't you, in your workshops?
Yeah, it's the thing I got punished for most at school when I grew up in this country in the late 1950s. Lots of detentions, a number of canings for drawing in class when I should have been listening. But I've drawn a teacher here just relaxing over a cup of tea or coffee, thinking about his or her class and the challenges of that class. And on the day, every case example, every case study that I try to role play in front of the group, I'll try to role play the actual behaviour of the teacher and even the kids, which is a bit tiring, but will be supported by a picture of some kind. For example, before when I was talking about kids calling out, butting or fiddling with objects or listening to iPods. For example, this lad here, Daniel, when I walked up to Daniel, this is about 2 months ago back in Australia, it was on task learning time. I'd finished whole class teaching time. I was cruising around the room doing micro teaching, chatting with the kids at the table, asked them how I could help them, where they were up to, is it making sense? Now, I walked up to this lad and there must have been about 3 kids like Daniel with iPods or smartphones listening to music. School rules clear, we don't have iPhones or iPods on in class. And I walked up and I went like that, just to non-verbally cue him. And he took the earbuds out and stuck them in his pocket. And I said, "It's Daniel, isn't it?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How's your work going?" He said, "It's all right, it's okay, sort of, yeah." I said, "What are you up to?" He started to talk about it. I said, "Is it making sense?" He said, "Sort of." I said, "Tell me about it, because I don't teach this particular subject. I'm here as a visiting teacher working with your class." And he started to talk about the subject, about the work. After a couple of minutes, I said, "All right, do your best. I'll be back a little bit later." And just before I left, I gave him a directed choice. Your iPod, I want you to put it in your bag, or if you like, leave it on your teacher's desk till break time. So the first thing we do in that tiny transaction about an issue about phones or things that are distracting him is not to walk up and say, "Give me that iPod," or "Give me that mini skateboard," or "Give me the keyring," or whatever they're mucking around with. The first part of the interaction is to become a teacher. Talk about the work. How's it going? Where are you up to? Check his name, Daniel. And just before I left, I said, "I want you to put it in your bag or on your teacher's table till break time." And then I walked away to give him take-up time. I said, I'll see you later. So I gave him a task reminder that I would be back. So even in that tiny transaction with one boy, Daniel, there's a lot going on, particularly in the way that the teacher enters the social space, the audience who are watching this kind of behaviour close by, and also the fact that it's his possession, his little smartphone that he's listening to his music to. Now, Daniel was reasonably cooperative. Other students in the class, one student said, oh, come on, I can still work with it on. I said, I'm sure you can. Partial agreement, I'm sure you can. In our school, though, the rule's clear. Now, in your bag, or if you like, getting back to the primary issue quickly, not the secondary behaviour. I don't care if you can work with it on. And I don't care if every teacher here lets you do that. Once we start arguing like that, we're moving further and further away from the primary issue at that point. And the other one I often get kids saying to me is, other teachers don't care. They'll even name the teacher. Oh, you go and ask her. She doesn't care. Like you ask Miss Davis and that, she doesn't care, like if we have, like as long as we get our work done. And my standard response to that is, even if you teach, I can check that with your teacher. I'm not sure if your teacher cares or not. I can check that with your teacher. Even if that's the case, the rule is clear. And get back to the primary issue. The rule's clear. In your bag, or if you like, leave it on my table, or the teacher's table till break time. And I'll come back and see how your work's going soon. And by walking away and giving take-up time, 8 out of 10 kids in very difficult schools I work, as I walk away, the sigh goes up, and you can see them almost just behind your back as you walk away. You can see them putting it away. I'll put it away then if I have to. And all that stuff is what we tactically ignore. We don't go back and say, listen, when you put it away, you don't make a song and dance about it. We don't feed that secondary residuality, which is all part of his social posturing that he may not be aware of, you know, the sulky, pouty eyes or the ceiling stuff. And again, if you watch a confidently effective, not cocky teacher, please, the way they interact is to keep that sense of calmness, but still keep the focus on creating a teaching and learning dynamic that's not easily distracted by iPods, you know, toys or inappropriate chatting or calling out or whatever it is.
Great. So that's Bill Rogers himself. As I said, I saw him a few years ago and he's brilliant, and you can see how he can encapsulate all of those different interactions, those different feelings, both from the student and from the teacher, all within that one incident. And we know we've been in that incident. We've all had exactly that time. That little video, by the way, from Osiris Education is freely available on YouTube, as are a few others. So he's worth looking up and having a look because he explains it really, really interestingly. But let me just pin down a few of his specific strategies. And these are from his book, Behaviour Management, again, that you can have a look at. So the first one is being assertive, what he calls being assertive. And this is, as you can see, you know, it's a bit broad. What does this actually mean? So let me define that for you. First of all, he says, don't be indecisive. Sometimes you will get a teacher who, you know, will be pulled this way and that by particular students within the class. Oh, I don't want to do that today, miss. Oh, can we do this instead? Oh, okay, we'll try this. Oh, no, but we want to do that. No, you need to be decisive, especially in regards to your lesson plan. What are you getting the young people to do? As an educator, we do concentrate a lot on learning, what they should be learning. But I remember talking to a couple of teachers who were struggling with their behaviour management a few years ago, and I said to them, just focus on actually what you want the student to do. Yes, the learning, you must do that first if you like, but then what do you want them to be doing? When I walk into the room to have a look at your lesson, what should they actually be working on? Also make sure that you don't issue threats that you can't follow through. So don't tell them all they're going to be in at break time, at recess, and then let them go at recess. You know, if you've said it, you've got to follow through with it. So you've got to be really careful, be decisive about what the threats you're going to use. Perhaps you should be saying something like, I will keep you in for 3 minutes at the start of your break because of this behavior. And then don't go back on it. Don't get into this trap of continual negotiation. Oh, if you're good, I'll take off the 3 minutes. Oh, I'll add another 4 minutes now. No, be decisive. Don't be indecisive. Time limits can work as well. So little timers up on the board are brilliant for that sort of giving that decisive nature to your lessons. And I'm a big fan of routines. So give the students a clear routine, particularly at the start of a lesson, of what they do. They walk in, they sit down, bags go under the desk, earpods, as Bill Rogers mentioned, go into their bags, or tech goes away, locked into their bags, pencil cases come out, book comes out, and it's pretty good to use a do now activity as well. Of course, the opposite to that is this autocratic teacher, which Bill Rogers also talks about not wanting. When teachers are deliberately nasty to students, they make nasty comments to try and get the students feeling off balance because that makes them a little bit easier to manage. Yelling at the class. It just doesn't work. You might scare them enough initially, but A, they won't learn because that activates that fight or flight bit of the brain, which isn't the cerebral cortex. It's not the bit of the brain that's actually willing to take in information and learn. And B, it might work once or twice, but these kids will get older and they're not going to listen to you yelling over. It'll just become white noise. Knowing your students is all about relationship building as well. So not being autocratic and actually getting to time to listen to them, to maybe respond to them as individuals. And we shouldn't be relying in our lessons on the school systems alone. It shouldn't be about punitive measures. I'm going to send you to the deputy principal. I'm going to give you a detention with a DP. That doesn't work in the long run either. It ends up undermining you. What you've got to rely on is your relationships. As I said right at the beginning, how are you going to form those relationships with your students so that you don't become indecisive and you don't become autocratic? You get that middle ground. And this strategy, take up time, is a good way of developing relationships with your students. So take up time is when you issue an instruction to a student, like Bill Rogers was mentioning, put away the earpods, and you then walk away. You give them that moment to actually take up the time to follow your instruction. You don't stand there over them, watching them do it, because it's all about social interaction, they've got their friends around them. They don't want to lose face in front of their friends. They want to maintain their social standing. So if you walk away from somebody after giving them an instruction, you give them time to do it themselves, but you also give them time to do that social posturing, as Bill Rogers said. That thing where they can roll their eyes at you, at your back, they can maybe say something under their breath that's not particularly appropriate, and you can tactically ignore that. those things that are being said, because it's all about their social interaction. Adolescents are at that point where they're trying to learn how to be social with their peers, and it's difficult. And so giving them that opportunity to explore those spaces is really, really important. It doesn't undermine your authority. Why? Because they're doing what you originally asked. So that core issue, let's say it is telling a student, take your hat off, then you walk away. It shows your confidence that they are going to do what they're told. And it also gives them an opportunity to maintain their face, to save face with their friends as well. So take up time is a really good way of establishing good relationships with students. If you watch them like a hawk, they're not going to enjoy your company. They're going to find building a relationship with you difficult. If you have confidence in them that they're good, nice young people and they're basically going to follow through on a reasonable instruction that you've given them, then at that point you're going to start building these relationships. And it's those relationships that will help you manage the classroom much, much better. Similar to that is another tactic of Bill Rogers, which is called partial agreement. And this is when you agree a little bit with what the student is saying, and then you return that conversation back to the focus. So you don't start by focusing on what the student is perhaps doing wrong. Let's say Sam is having a chat to Amina, and you have asked Sam to listen, to stop talking and to listen. Now, if you walk up to Sam while he's working there and tell him, can you stop talking to Amina, please? You really need to focus on the lesson. It's very likely Sam, especially if he's talking to Amina, is going to want to save face. So it's very likely he will say something to you like, oh, but miss, I'm doing my work. So he's immediately starting to argue. He's starting to talk about his work, when actually your instruction was to stop talking. So this is where you'd use partial agreement. You'd say to Sam, okay, Sam, I can see you're doing your work. Well done for that. That's great. But now you really need to listen because I'm going to be explaining some complex things. So you need to stop talking and listen. So you reissue the instruction. You partially agree. Yes, he is doing some of his work. That's great. But then you move it back to that original point. You then turn your back, you walk away, and of course he rolls his eyes, he looks at Amina, who he's trying to impress, and he says, oh, so he's always having a go at me, oh. And you tactically ignore that, and then you continue with the lesson, and at that point, as Bill Rogers said, 8 out of 10 students will actually start listening. So make sure you have that partial agreement. The last one is pausing, and I think a lot of lessons that I've noticed where the teacher is struggling with behaviour management is around this issue, timing of lessons and pausing. It's actually very much linked to the idea of clarity, being really clear with students, as I mentioned at the start, about what students need to be doing, not just what they're learning, not just the overall concept, but at this moment in time, what do they actually have to be doing? And I think pausing is very much linked to that. In every lesson, there are these natural changes of gear where you've perhaps explained a concept to a student and then you've asked them to open up their books, go to exercise 13.3 if we're talking about a slightly boring lesson, and then start from A, exercise 13.3 and start working. And that transition from the explaining of what something is to doing exercise 13.3A, that little transition is often the crack in which bad behaviour can grow. Suddenly there's a little bit of talking, some of it's necessary. Where's my book? Oh, can you lend me a pencil? All that sort of stuff. So there is that sort of hubbub in a classroom, as we all know. And within that hubbub can become poor behaviour. So using pausing can be really, really effective. So before you immediately say 13.3 is over, now get on to the exercise, come on, what are you doing, Yusuf, at the back? You haven't even opened your book yet, etc., etc. Raising the temperature, raising the energy in the room, everybody gets more and more worked up. Just take a pause. Say to the students, okay, now you understand what we've been talking about. Any last questions? No? Everybody's clear. Okay. So, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to open your textbooks to page 27. And a lot of you out there will remember teachers perhaps that you were taught by or other teachers that you've watched at your school, and you know the ones who actually take that time are the ones that have calmer, more focused lessons. So that's what pausing is all about. Yeah? Sometimes it's actually about just changing the mood a little bit. So, you'll have a joke with the students, or you will get off task, but you'll get as much off task as the students will get off task. I know I've certainly done that with my students. And then it's just about signaling to them, oh, this was a pause. This was a momentary break. And now we're going to move back to what we're really focused on in this lesson. It's a bit like just taking a step out of the lesson and doing a running commentary on it for the students, making the learning process explicit. Bit of metacognition, really. But you're signposting that metacognition for the students. So that could be, okay, that was great. We've had a nice 5-minute conversation about who won the rugby over the weekend. Awesome. But now I'd like us to, let's get back to exercise 13.3. Remember, that's what we started working on at the start. So we've had that pause, but let's get back into it right now. Rather than sort of getting flustered and thinking, oh, we can't talk about this. Come on, you start working, and then a kid will keep talking about the rugby scores, and you might mention something back to him and have a joke, and then the other kids don't understand what they need to be doing. It's just about taking that time, that moment to pause, to signal the pause, and then to move it back onto what you should be focusing on. So, thank you very much. Those 3 strategies and that overarching strategy, which is, being assertive, not being an autocrat, and also not being indecisive, that sort of overarching strategy that Bill Rogers talks about, plus the other 3, are keys for your classroom. Of course, you might be doing some of these already. You might be trying some other things that came up in that Bill Rogers video. If you're watching this with a group of people, now's a good time just to click pause, have a discussion. But otherwise, thank you very much. I'm Suleiman Charles Neve. This is Education Changemakers, and enjoy your teaching.